Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all keeping safe in this time. Today we're going to talk about the road to Emmaus. It's a wonderful story, actually, and many people have talked about it over the years. I want to begin with a little short story about a disciple who was feeling quite ill, and he went to the master to get help. And the master said, "Have you come for a cure?" He said, "Well, of course, why else would I come?" And he said, "Well, most people don't come for a cure, they come for relief, because a cure causes pain, and so they come really just for relief." He said, "People who want a cure without pain are like people who like progress but don't want change." That'll mean something as I go along further to you. Just keep that story in mind. I wanted to just share with you a little vignette from my life a long while back. I was living in British Columbia at the time, and it was a very kind of tumultuous time in my life with my family, and we had decided that we needed to move back to Ontario. One of the reasons was for the health of my one child who had very bad asthma. The doctor said, "You need to get out of this climate, it's very damp here, be better if you maybe went to Edmonton or Arizona." We thought, well, we don't know anybody there, so we decided that we're going to move back. And so I talked to my employer and said, "Can you move me back to Ontario?" And they said no. So I said, "Well, I'm going to have to leave the company." And I began to make arrangements. And I moved back on the strength of a job that was offered to me in Ontario. So the family had all gone back, and then in the 2 weeks that I was packing everything up, I got a call from the employer who had offered the job to say, "I'm sorry, the funding's fallen through, and we can't offer you that job." And I was absolutely devastated. My family is back in Ontario. I had left my job here in BC, and I had to go back to Ontario without a job. And so the first thing I did was, I had gone into work that day. I worked at downtown Vancouver, in the Hotel Vancouver, that's where my office was. Right across the street was the Christchurch Cathedral. And Herbie O'Driscoll, who was the brother of Percy O'Driscoll, was the dean there. And I had been to some of his midweek services, noon hour services, and I'd gotten quite to like him. So I went over because I needed to talk to somebody. And I walked in and I asked to see him, and he could see that I was quite distressed. And I said, "I just wanted to talk to you." And he said, "Well, I can't see you right now, but tomorrow we'll meet for lunch in your office." So he came to my office with a little bag of sandwiches he had, and we sat and we talked. And I can't even remember much about what we talked about, but he listened to me, and he realized that I was very, very stressed. And so he made me feel a little bit better. And so eventually I thanked him, and of course I moved back to Ontario. And it was interesting because about 3 years after I moved back, Herbie O'Driscoll came back to London. He came to London to do a seminar at Huron College. And so I wanted to talk to him. And at a break, he was sitting there, and I went over to see him, and I said, "Herbie, I don't know whether you remember me, but I came to you one day in great distress to talk to you, and you came over, we sat in my office," and he said, I remember you. He said, "How are you?" And I said, well, what I was able to tell him was, I had just completed my first year of theology at Huron College, and hopefully in 2 years, I was going to become an Anglican priest. He said, "Oh, that's wonderful." He said, "That's just wonderful." So we talked a little bit, and then he asked me this question, and it was a very important question. He said to me, "Do you think that you could have made that drastic a career change decision had you not been in the state that you were in the chaos you felt and in the anxiety that you felt?" And I looked at him and I said, "Probably not, probably not." So when I'm thinking about the story of the road to Emmaus, I'm thinking about the disciples that day, the two of them that were walking along the road, despondent, feeling anxious, probably feeling a bit angry, and sort of trying to put together what had happened to them, I can understand that feeling that they were in, that anxiety, that crisis that they felt. And they were sort of mulling everything over and feeling really bad. And then as the story goes, a stranger came up beside them, who the Bible said immediately was Jesus. So we don't know, was it Jesus in the flesh? We're not really sure. But he began to talk to them, and he said, well, what are you talking about? And of course, the response immediately was they were angry, like, who the heck are you? Are you the only one in Jerusalem that hasn't heard about all of the things that happened there? And they began to tell him about Jesus and the things that they did and the things that he promised, and none of that's worked out, and they're really feeling badly about it. And so he continued to talk to them and said, well, tell me about him. So they began to tell him more about him. And as they got into the story, he began to sort of explain to them or talk to them and saying, well, isn't that really what he talked about? Isn't that really what he said? And they began to feel a little bit better as they talked to this guy. Sort of like I felt when Herbie began talking to me. Not telling me what I should do or how to make it better, he just talked to them. So they felt really comfortable with him, and they came close to the inn. It was getting late. They said, why don't you come in and have dinner with us? So they did. And they ordered their food, and they probably continued to talk while they're waiting for their food. And then the food came, and it was the stranger that took the bread, and he broke it. And immediately as he broke it, something happened to the disciples, and their eyes opened, and they got really excited. And what they did was, I don't think it was the stranger that disappeared. I think it was the disciples that disappeared. I think they probably grabbed a hunk of bread and rushed out of the inn and left the stranger to pay the bill. Well, what they did then, you see, is they went back to see the disciples in the upper room. We call it the upper room because they were there. And they were excited too, because they had thought that maybe they had seen Jesus as well. And they were all excited. But they were in the room afraid. They were afraid for what might happen to them because they were followers of Jesus. So they weren't ready to go out yet. They were still living in fear in the room. And what they were probably having to come to terms with was that just because they thought they saw Jesus, which made them feel good, it wasn't over. There were things to be done. And they probably had no idea how their lives were going to be and how they were going to be turned upside down and some of the pain that they were going to go through. I mean, as we read through the scriptures, we realize that they were persecuted and all kinds of things happened to them. And so if they were going to get a cure, it wasn't going to come without pain. And so they had to stay in that room for a while until they felt the strength to move out. Now, I want to sort of now talk about what we're going through right now, this pandemic. It's something that none of us could have predicted. It's not something that I have ever experienced in my life, and I think most people can say they've never experienced anything like this. The only thing people that I think maybe feel close to this would be the people that went through the wars. It must have been similar for them. Not knowing what was going to happen, mourning the loss of loved ones who they lost in the wars. It must have been pretty painful. But this pandemic is so globally widespread, and we really don't know what's going to happen. And we want it to stop, we want it to change, and yet, you see, what we realize is that if we want a cure, there's going to be pain. And so I'm thinking about how everybody wants it to go back to normal. We just want things to go back to normal. And we'd rather that happen without any pain. Just give me my job back. Let's just get back so that I could go see my neighbors, we could go and talk to our family, and everything will be fine. Well, I don't really think it's going to happen that way. I think that I think things will change, and I think that the decisions that we make right now in this time of, well, I can say panic or anxiety and stress, the decisions we make are going to be very profound for us. They're going to be life-changing decisions. And I've already talked to people, and you can read it on Facebook, that people are talking about how they're thinking differently now. They're seeing things differently now. And of course, we've talked about it. I mentioned it last time I preached, how we begin to appreciate people that we hadn't appreciated before. For the things that they do, right from people who work in the medical profession to people who sell you coffee. We look at them and we say, thank you. Thank you for doing what you do. And we never would have thought to do that before. And now we're thinking that, that probably we are. But I don't want to be a pessimist here. I just want to say that, yes, we will get back. Things will be different, hopefully for the better a lot of the times, but it's going to be a bit painful. It's going to be maybe not what we really think it's going to be, if it's going to be authentic change. Remember, we can't have change without a little bit of pain. And those decisions that we make are going to be tough ones. Just like the disciples in the upper room, they realized that when they go out, it's not going to be easy. And just like back when I was coming to Ontario without a job, I knew in the back of my mind that my career was going to change, but I was kind of putting it off. I kind of thought, well, I'll be able to just continue what I'm doing and everything will be fine. And eventually I had to make the decision. And I had been thinking about going into the ministry. I can't tell you that, it just came out of the blue. And I remember thinking, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well do it now. Because in a way, that was forced on me, that decision, because of what I was going through. So I think if we think about that in our lives, probably a lot of you have had that experience in your life too, that when you've made a profound decision in your life, it has probably come when you've been feeling some anxiety and a little pain. And you know in your mind that you had to make that choice, but that catalyst was feeling that anxiety along the way. So I leave you with those thoughts, and when you think of the road to Emmaus and the disciples and what they're going through, I hope you can understand how profoundly difficult that was for them. God bless and take care.